On this week's episode of the Nittany Dispatch, we discuss James Franklin's Tuesday presser ahead of the Indiana game, talk about what went wrong against Ohio State, and preview the Indiana game on this week's episode of the Nittany Dispatch. Hello and welcome to the Nittany Dispatch. I am John Sauver, Penn State football beat reporter for the Senate Daily Times. I am joined, as always, by Audrey Snyder of The Athletic. Audrey, it's
Happy
been
Tuesday.
3 days. Yeah, it's been 3 days, and I don't know that a ton has changed. We did get some good info today. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing great, John. I didn't tell you this yet, but after I dropped you off on Sunday, we returned. I was going to return the rental car, so I was filling up with gas back in State College, and stopped to fill up the tank. And my greeting back to town, I was met by a gentleman who said, "Audrey, I'm sorry you had to sit through that yesterday in Columbus." And I just said, "Oh, hey, like, oh, no worries, it all kind of pays the same." And he shared his thoughts with me right there at the gas pump. So to the gentleman at the gas station in Belfont, thank you for sharing your thoughts. And I'm with you. He had questions about why didn't they keep using Nick Singleton? And I'm like, yeah, that's kind of how it is. And then I rolled back into my neighborhood, and one of my neighbors, an elderly gentleman, said to me, "Audrey, I don't think I'm going to live to see them beat Ohio State." So it's been bleak
It's pretty
around here, to
grim.
say the least. Yeah. So happy
Yeah,
Tuesday.
yeah, right. And before we get too much further, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast, especially on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button down below if you're watching right now. Leave ratings and reviews on Spotify, on Apple. It always helps us out. But
5
no,
stars.
yeah, that's right. 5 stars always. But no, this was it's been a strange weekend, right?
Yeah.
We were obviously wrong about our predictions. I think we both thought this week, heading into last weekend, that this week would be different and the vibe around the program would be different. But James spoke today for the second time since the game ended, the first since
Mhm.
the day of the game. And I thought this was, I've been on the beat for this is my third season full time, fifth season overall. I thought this was one of the most candid Tuesday pressers that I can remember in my time. Obviously, you've been
Yeah.
been on the beat even longer. How did you feel about that?
I was going into it, I hoped that he was going to be kind of honest and forthcoming about it. Like, I hoped we weren't going to get, "Hey, we're just here to talk about Indiana." Because quite frankly, John, none of us are here to talk about Indiana.
And none of us
um,
did.
None of us asked questions about Indiana, and I think he understands that, right? He understood the magnitude of the Ohio State game and certainly the way it went. I do get to, like, after a game in the news conference, like, I understand it's the, "Hey, he's been off the field 15, 20 minutes." Like, sometimes we get answers that are kinda, like, a little bit all over the place, and I get that because you just kind of, had your heart ripped out, and you put so much time and energy into these games that sometimes afterward you're left saying, like, "Did he really say that? Did he?" And I think there were certainly some of those comments this week, and I think one of the things with James Franklin, and he said it Tuesday, and I think fans have been waiting for him to say it, but basically said, like, "This is all on me, like, I take all the blame for it." And that's something that he doesn't say very often, and I think maybe it's just because in his mind it's a foregone conclusion, right? If you lose a game, it's on him. But I think there's at least a very big portion of the fan base that wants to hear that after every loss, and he doesn't always say that. And maybe that's just kind of like an awareness thing. But I do feel like he said that today. He owned that. And, like, I don't know if that's supposed to make people feel any better, but I think it's like that piece of accountability that we didn't hear on Saturday.
Well, and I think, I wonder, I've been thinking about a lot since we left the presser.
This is what
Probably
11 hours in a car does to you
yeah,
to me, yeah.
yeah. But I think the last 4 hours since the presser ended, I've been thinking a lot about the way he handled that and
Mhm.
what it all means and stuff. And I think part of that accountability is the acknowledgement of, like, he's just gonna be here for a while, right? Like,
Yeah.
this is in years past, there has been some it's been a little up in the
Mhm.
air, right? Like, there's been rumors
Will
about
he,
him,
won't
like,
he,
yeah,
USC
right.
facilities, yeah, like, this
Florida
is
State, all of that
he ain't
stuff.
going
But like,
anywhere. Like, I think
yeah,
that's
it's an acknowledgement that he's
yeah.
gonna be here for a while and taking accountability because of that, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's where, because I've seen a lot of it, and I know that Twitter/X isn't always the best, isn't the most indicative of fans and how they're thinking, but I've seen a lot of that of, Penn State needs to hire somebody else. Like, Did you all just forget about the contract? Like, did we forget that? Because it seems like some people did, right? Like, that's not where they're at. This is still a top 10 team, a damn good team. Yes, there are shortcomings. Yes, 1-9 against Ohio State is not nearly good enough. 3-16 against AP top 10, not nearly good enough. James Franklin addressed that on Tuesday as well, and was asked kind of a big picture question again about 1-9. And he said that, I'm paraphrasing here, but he said that I wish I would have answered that on Saturday, but that he was so focused on the game at that time. But that it is fair to judge him on all of it. He said wins, losses, everything here. Like, it is fair to judge him and his staff on it. And fair or not, John. I mean, we were all going to do it anyway. We've been doing it. I mean, that's the job, right? Like that's just how
Yeah.
this works.
Yeah, but I do think it is important to that he kind of acknowledged it, right? That
Hmm.
that this was where he's kind of at mentally too, taking responsibility for what I think. I don't know, not that he hasn't had ownership of the program before, but now that it seems like he's settled into being here, it's like this is like the final step of taking full ownership of all of it moving forward because again he's acknowledging I think on some level that this is his now. It officially is his program, right? There's no more, or at least this year there's no flirting with other programs to try and get other things.
We're a
It feels
decade
like
into it. Like, we're a
yeah,
decade into it, right? Like, this is kind of this is your moment, James Franklin, to kind of step into it, acknowledge where your program is, acknowledge that there are some shortcomings. And I thought he was as forthcoming as I had hoped he would be in this presser. I mean, I think there were even some things that, and I will say, I mean, you could certainly tell he was exhausted.
yeah,
You could see it in his face, you could hear it in his voice. I don't think he's gotten much sleep since Saturday, and quite frankly, I
he
don't think
said as
anybody in
much
that
too.
building. Yeah, like I think he was not asking for our coffee orders today, but I think there's a lot of coffee and Red Bull going in that building, especially this week. And I think it's the accountability piece, but it's also the transparency piece, right? And I thought he did a really nice job of grasping that today and like understanding that we're not asking about Indiana for a multitude of reasons. One of them being it's not a big game. But also like the way things went. Um, John, what I guess do you think was the biggest thing you learned today from James Franklin? Because there was a lot. Like, I mean, usually I don't write off of every Tuesday news conference, but this one I did because there was so much to parse through, I thought.
Yeah, same here. Honestly, it's funny, just real quick on the accountability stuff. He did take accountability, which I think is the right thing to do in a position of leadership. This also doesn't feel like a loss that is like totally on him, right? Like we talked about like where all the blame lies and everything. It's still his.
He
He
made the
made the
hire.
hires,
It's
right?
his
He
offensive coordinator. Yeah.
Yes, totally agree. But the actual of
Right.
the way it played out on Saturday wasn't like, oh, they had a big lead and blew it because,
Right.
maybe
They tensed up
there's
and yeah.
yeah, they tensed up and everything like that. Yeah, this didn't feel like that. This felt different than that. It was a different kind of loss. But I think the biggest thing that I learned today was like the acknowledgement of all of the shortcomings on offense, right? Like it was not he was not, I don't want to say he wasn't pulling punches. It's because it's not like he was attacking players or coaches or
Right.
whatever, but he was being honest and he was being forthright that he said across the board, that it wasn't a good game on offense. He said that the receivers are doing stuff that maybe we don't see. Like we've talked about in the past on here, like the miscommunication. I think it was against Illinois or North. It had to be Illinois, I think, where Keandre Lambert Smith runs a comeback route and Drew
Mhm.
Allar throws it
Mhm.
short or throws it
I think it was
as if
Illinois.
it's against zone when he saw man. I can't remember exactly what it was. He mentioned something similar, right? When you're running it to 8 yards or you run it to 12 yards when you're supposed to run it to 8 or something like that,
Yep.
right? Like
Depth
in
of route,
depth,
um,
right? And
consistency in
placing of routes,
practice.
yeah, and like all of this stuff, like, and this was about the receivers specifically, like
Mhm.
acknowledging like this is why no one beyond the top two stepped up. And frankly, we saw that issue with Keandre again against Ohio State, where him and Drew were not on the same page on a comeback route. And both kind of looked a little bit frustrated from the press box. But I think the main thing though was he was not exactly defending any aspect of the play calling, right? Like there
Right,
was
and I
no.
think that's very telling.
Yeah, I think that's probably where you're right. It's telling
Mhm.
of where things are with him and with Mike Yursich. He said that they got away essentially from their stuff that they
Their
relied on, the things that
identity.
worked well. Yeah, their
Yeah,
identity.
so
And I
here I
followed up.
just I just pull up the question, John, just real quick. He said because last week so much of what James Franklin said was, this is our identity, we know what it is, blah blah blah. And he said on Tuesday, he said, I thought our identity was staying on schedule, converting on third downs, and then either converting on third downs or going for it on fourth down situations. I feel like that had been our identity for the season. Well, that was not what we was not what we saw on Saturday,
Right.
right? And that's an admission of your play calling. And then he also offered up in that sequence, going back to what James Franklin said was one of 5 or 6 critical plays in that Ohio State game, which was the 3rd and 1 in the first quarter. They're around midfield. 3rd and 1, they throw the ball, it's incomplete. Penn State looks like they're going to go for it, and they call a timeout. And that's what I had asked him about after the game. Like, did Drew audible out of that? Like, what was going on there? And he said, it was a pass call and all of that. Well, he did shed more light on that today, which I appreciated, because what happened was,
Unprompted too, for what it's worth.
yes, which I thought was a really good explanation. They called the timeout because they had 12 men on the field, that they were going to go for it on fourth down. James Franklin said he liked their fourth down call, which you're going to say that either way, right? Because we don't know what it was. But after burning that timeout, he talked with Manny Diaz and was like, you know what? We just lost the element of surprise right here because we had 12 men on the field. So, again, not a great look for the coaching staff for your personnel groupings. But then, so that's why they punted. So I thought that was, again, you're starting to see more of the full picture of how this thing fell apart.
I also don't agree with that thought process, for what it's worth. I understand it. I
Oh,
don't
yeah,
think
you
you
got to go
lose.
for
I
it.
don't think. Yeah, I don't think momentum
Hmm.
is at play there. I understand, like in the heat of the moment, it's obviously different for him on the sidelines, and
You know
maybe
what
if
you
I
do
were in
there,
that
John?
situation, what's that?
The T formation.
Right? Like, or you
Where was
like,
the T formation? Like, he
or
even he
like
unprompted mentioned that today. He
Or go
like,
with a tush push. Like either
yeah,
like they have a 6'5", 240-pound quarterback. Like
yep.
they've had success with that. And while Ohio State did have the offensive line
Mhm.
overmatched athletically, they did not from a physicality standpoint or a power standpoint. And I think they would have won that rep had they run it, which makes it even more shocking that they went again. They went away from the whole thing altogether. And like I couldn't believe that they shifted that far from. And he was right. Like their identity was X, Y, and Z, and they went to ABC instead. And it was really surprising. And we talked about Saturday when I asked him about the how he'd evaluate the offensive
Mhm.
play calling. He said, about getting away from the run, but he would know more on Sunday when he rewatched everything. Well, he actually went away from that comment about getting away from the run. He didn't think
Yeah.
that was the issue, but the quote he gave today I thought was really interesting. He mentioned the identity again, and the going away from the goal line back and everything. Then he said, I didn't feel like we had been as consistent and as aggressive in certain areas that maybe we had been in the past. Part of that is who we're playing from a talent and scheme standpoint, obviously. But yeah, obviously, when you're talking about evaluating that, opening drives are a big evaluator of that in terms of game planning and success. Third down is a big indicator for quarterbacks as well as coordinators. Red zone, those things I think are really telling. Yeah, obviously, based on the lack of success, it was not a good game for us. Uh,
Not
the
great.
yeah,
Not
the
great.
third down is a big indicator for quarterbacks as well as coordinators is,
One of
again,
16.
it's telling though, like
Yeah.
who he I think thinks is at fault here for all of this, because he also said a lot, not as much today, but on Saturday, that like he wasn't really putting a lot on Drew. I didn't think so anyways. Like it didn't sound like he was
Mhm.
putting a ton of this on Drew. He didn't say he played a perfect game or anything like that, but my interpretation was that there was other stuff at play that maybe impacted the passing game. And I think again that quote today is pretty telling.
Well, and I think too, the thing that I asked James Franklin on Tuesday was, okay, we've heard so much about the Bo Prabula package. Why didn't you use it against Ohio State, right? Like, what are you saving it for? Because certainly this offense looked like it was in shambles, and at this point, like, why not try something, anything? Because Jim Knowles and this defense, like, at least hadn't seen this look. And hell, if you're throwing, trick plays to Keandre Lambert Smith, what's one more at this point, right? And the interesting thing about that was James Franklin did say, which is the first time we've gotten this on the record, that they do have a Bo Prabula package every week, and that sometimes we only see that because it's a blowout, but that it was part of the plan against Ohio State, but that because they were so terrible on third downs, his my words, not his, because they were so woeful on third downs that they never got a chance to go to the Prabula package because they never got into a rhythm. But then he did say, he's like, well, yeah, hindsight, maybe we should have tried it on first or second down. And yeah, absolutely. Like, I think that's, again, not a great reflection on your play caller.
Right, and I keep coming back to this, right?
Mhm.
I wrote about it after the game. It's I think a crucial part of what we heard today. There's blame to be spread around without a shadow of a doubt, but I keep coming back to that Mike Yurcich kind of was at the center of all of it, right? Like
Mhm.
was at the center of a lot of the issues that they had, whether it's play design, whether it's play calling, whether it's decisions to pass or run in certain situations. Like I keep coming back to that being a core issue that was at play on Saturday, and I know I have a hard time rectifying what they were through 6 games through what they were in game 7. It just
Yeah.
it's a major disconnect that I have right now. And I can't I kind of can't get past it. And I hope to um it's unfortunate we don't always have access to like all 22 film. I think that would
Mhm.
be really helpful with wide receivers.
Or
I'm
to
hoping
talk to the offensive coordinator, that would be nice.
right, or talking to the guy who's in charge of all of it. And I give a lot of credit, by the way, to Drew Allar for standing there and taking our questions for 10 to 15 minutes. Because again, Penn State doesn't give us coordinators on game day. So the person that had to answer for Mike Yurcich's rough day at the office was 19-year-old Drew Allar. And
Mhm.
I don't know. I
Eh
think I think that's, and we don't have to go too deep into this because this is maybe a little too inside baseball, but I think that is a major flaw. And I think that the people that should be answering for what goes wrong in a loss are not the teenagers involved in the situation.
Yeah, and that's so much this sport, right? I mean, that's so much of it, and that's been this way here ever since James Franklin's tenure with coordinators. And kind of one of the parallels I made in my story on the Athletic over the weekend was like, yes, there was another Penn State quarterback in tears after a loss to Ohio State answering questions. And yes, we've seen this a lot because it was the same thing after 4th and 5 with Trace McSorley. It was the same thing 2 years ago with Sean Clifford kind of standing there along that long walkway at Ohio Stadium. And it's just how they operate, how they want to do it. But yeah, the coaches, the coordinators, like it would be nice to hear from Mike Yurcich. I think at this point we probably will not hear from him until
The bowl
maybe
game
early signing
is
period, most likely the bowl
yeah.
media day, maybe for like a few minutes or something like that. And then it's tough because at that point it's always the questions, and Mike always is very kind of like this with us. It's like, well, I'm only here to talk about this game, and it's like, well, you know what? If we only talk to you a handful of times per year, we have questions beyond this, upcoming bowl game or whatever it may be. So we're
Yep.
still working to get answers to a lot of these questions, but John, do you think anything with this receiving core now that we're 7 games into it? I mean, the fact that we heard all off season, they need guys to step up all spring, all summer, all preseason. Is anything going to change with this receiving core between now and Michigan, like to give fans any glimmer of hope?
I mean, I don't think so, right? Like I kept harping on like Cephas was
Mhm.
separating and getting open in games. And I to be clear, James did not name Dante when he was talking about this stuff. He is not he's saying this is my what I drew from it. I think if I had to guess, the one of the players he's talking about with some of those mistakes is probably Cephas because everything else I think looks good on game day, right?
Uh,
It's the stuff
yeah.
that we can't see. I think that is probably
And I
keeping him off the field.
think to your point of the kind of the mistakes, and James Franklin said, sometimes it's maybe having too many guys in the same area. I think on the Lambert Smith on the flea flicker play, I believe after that one was when Cephas came off the field and Franklin really lit into him. And I think that maybe is what kind of he was referring to. And again, James Franklin said, like, kind of, hey, trust us because we're seeing everything in practice and the consistency piece. But yeah, to me, John, it's concerning because here you are, your receiving core at this point, it is what it is. And I just don't think you are going to get that massive production. James Franklin was asked today if he thinks he has a true number one receiver on this roster. And it was part of a more broad question about the receiving core. And he never specifically answered that first part of the question, which maybe, again, he's tired. Maybe it just kind of went over his head, or maybe there's a reason for that.
I was going to say, I think either he was, and again, reasonably so, tired, or he answered it without answering it, right? And I
Right.
think it's one of those two things. And even if he doesn't feel that way, I think it's probably pretty clear that there isn't a number one receiver on this team. We talked a lot about Marvin Harrison Jr. on Saturday and how incredible he is. That isn't
Penn
what a number
State,
one receiver looks like.
Penn
That's what the
State
best receiver in the
defense. No, go
Yeah,
ahead, yeah. Penn
I
State
was gonna say,
defense caught a stray.
yeah, he said they
Yeah,
lost track of Harrison, which is true at
which
times,
is
but like, I mean,
fair, but also, like,
come on,
come
like that
on,
can't.
yeah.
I understand, like it. They're evaluating all of it, and that's a piece of it. It's just
Mhm,
not a really consequential piece to me. But Harrison isn't a number one receiver. He is the number one receiver in the country. Like you don't need that guy on your team to be able to win these games. You need a normal number one, right? Like you need a guy that can go in the first two rounds of the NFL draft reasonably so, like a Chris Godwin type, right? When he was at Penn
mhm.
State. They don't have to be the best receiver in the country or even the conference. They just have to be like one of the 3 to 5 best in the conference. And like those guys aren't on Penn State's roster right now. I
Well, and
don't
John,
know
I
if the
will
younger
they ever
guys,
be? Like, will they
right?
ever be? I think that's the other question to this because I think and, something else I wrote on The Athletic, like, again, we're 10 years in, James Franklin's 5 offensive coordinators in, 5 receivers coaches in, right? Like, you don't part ways with Taylor Stubblefield unless you think something's going to significantly get better. Well, they did, and now it's like, well, you've got guys who can't get separation. Like, is this receiving core in any better of a spot right now with Marcus Higgins? And it's tough to say because he hasn't been here this long. This is the room that he inherited, but it makes you wonder with all the turnover there. And this is, James Franklin's background, offensive coordinator, wide receivers coach. Like, why does it always seem like these are the areas that we have the most questions about when this is like the area that he's most experienced in? Like to me, and it could just be an anomaly, but to me, it's kind of interesting.
I think it probably is an anomaly, like, and it's just a last 2
Yeah.
years kinda thing, and I think part of it is, like, maybe some missed evaluations on guys, part of it is guys not developing like you'd expect them to,
Hmm.
and there's all sorts of things at play, especially in a position group that's so big, from a numbers standpoint. I do think Caden Saunders has shown himself well when he plays, which, that's another one I'm curious as to why he isn't on the field more as the 3rd
Yeah.
receiver, especially when he can play the slot and you can move Lambert Smith outside. I think wide receiver has to be priority number 1, 2, and 3 this offseason in the transfer portal. I think they need to go get someone that is like the established high level guy that is leaving a program to get a better opportunity, not because they're not getting playing time, right? Like it felt like a lot of the guys, like Cephas technically fits that mold. And again, like I think he's
Yeah.
shown himself well when it, like from our perspective, from the knowing what we can know, stuff, I think he's done well, but I think they need to go get a legitimate number one this offseason no matter what.
But John, how do you do that, right? Because everybody wants that. And to me, it's again like it comes down to recruiting and recruiting elite guys at that position. And that's just where there's been shortcomings with this staff. And this isn't just like a 1 or 2 year thing. Like, I think you look at it and you say, okay, like we're talking about the elite of the elite. They had Justin Shorter and that flamed out and they moved on, right? Like, that was one. They've done a tremendous job with Chris Godwin, with Jahan Dotson. Parker Washington, it was interesting. I don't think we ever got close to really kind of seeing his full potential. Then he gets hurt. Um, but
KJ
I just
Hamler.
think, yeah, Hamler was another a good one, like different skill set for sure. You look at Deshaun Hamilton, they did a nice job with, but you just haven't seen so many of these marquee guys. And of course, you kind of the double dose of pain here for Penn State fans, of course, is that Marvin Harrison Jr., Philadelphia, St. Joe's Prep, and like he never even considered coming to Penn State, right? Like they just don't have that pedigree at the position. And how do you do that when you've got Brian Hartline over there who's just made Ohio State a wide receiver factory? Like it's just a really difficult position to be in. And it's gonna be, hey, you're gonna have to develop guys better than some of these other places, which again, Hartline is like out of this world, one of the best in college football. So that's a tough, really, really tough task. But how do you do that? And I think part of that is you've had so much turnover at that position with the receiving coaches that at some point something has to give there. And I think Saturday was a reflection of that. It was a reflection of all the turnover, the shortcomings on the recruiting trail. Look at Rico Scott at Harrisburg, right? Like one of the things that stood out to me this summer, a conversation I was having with someone, he's going to Alabama, and part of that was he lost a lot of faith in Penn State that they sent Taylor Stubblefield to recruit him days before Stubblefield was getting fired, right? Like James Franklin sent this guy to recruit him knowing he was going to fire Stubblefield, that weekend. So that does not give a lot of confidence to the receiver that you're recruiting. So I think all of that has to be examined. But yeah, absolutely, this offseason, you've got to upgrade this receiving core. And theoretically, John, it should be enticing that you have Drew Allar throwing you the ball, but until this offense gets it together, that's not really the bargaining chip that I think many people might think it is.
We take a break from the podcast to tell you about our lovely sponsor, the Voodoo Brewing Company, the State College Pub, located at 201 Elmwood Street here in State College, a place that I'm sure Penn State fans may be wanting to frequent a little bit more right now, Audrey.
They need that one this week. I encourage Penn State fans to get the Voodoo for at least one, probably more beers after this past weekend. You might need to
Yes.
drown your sorrows a little bit. And, John, with the nice weather we've had this week, perfect spot to
Yes.
go, grab a beer, sit outside, enjoy the weather before it turns into winter around here.
Yeah, a place, frankly, that you'll see us at. You've mentioned
Mm-hmm.
before, liking the Met Mosa. I always get, mixed with the Voodoo Love Child, my personal favorite beer there. A place that I go to a lot. They have great service. The vibes are immaculate. It's one of those places you can go sit down by the creek and just enjoy the sunshine, enjoy the fresh air. When it's cold out, with it getting cold, it's going to be fire pit season, so they're going to have
Love me
the
a
fire
fire
pits
pit.
down
Yeah.
there. Yeah, keep you nice and warm. Get you that nice little campfire vibe, and even though you're not at home, you can join them at every Tuesday at 6 p.m. for pub trivia, and every Thursday at 6 p.m. for bingo. Again, something that you and I have done in the past with very little success. And
Never won.
I'm beginning to think that like I'm just bad at bingo, and I don't know if that's possible, but it does feel true.
Yeah.
Of course,
I
you can
think
get food.
the cards might be rigged against me, maybe.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
It's definitely their
definitely
fault
that.
and not mine. Yeah, it's on the card, not me, and for not paying attention enough. But no, you can also visit to get some food from the new Voodoo Kitchen to go with your beer there. But yeah, absolutely a place that we love, somewhere that we frequent often. That it is for my money the best brewery in State College. That is Voodoo Brewing Company, State College Pub, located at 201 Elmwood Street. Well, and I think we're probably going to be having deeper conversations about the offense in general this offseason too than just the
Whew.
player personnel, right? Like
Do you think
I think
anything changes? I'm putting you on the spot. Do you think
from
anything?
what standpoint,
Do you think Mike Yursich is the offensive coordinator next year?
that's tough. I will,
Very tough.
as of now, I would say no. I'm not reporting anything, to be clear. This is
Mm-hmm.
my opinion. I think the track record over the last couple of years is like the first 2 years, it was like, okay, like they'll get there, they'll get going, they'll get going. And this year has been kind of like, it's funny. The first 6 weeks on their own, you can look at and say, okay, this is like they're doing what they got to do to win these games. These aren't great opponents. They're fine. It's not a big deal. And then when you get to Ohio State and it looks the same way, it's like, okay, no, this is just who they are. They were playing like that because they kind of can't do anything else on offense. Game 7 to me contextualizes games 1 through 6 much better, I guess is what I'm saying, right? It makes
Yeah.
1 through 6 look much worse when 7 is this bad. And I think, you know, this is year 3, right, of Yursich,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
like
2 years of
it's a long
Clifford.
time. Yeah, it's a long time to be a coordinator and not hit the highest levels of success, right? Especially at a program like Penn State where the aspiration is elite. And like as of right now, I would say no. Again, I don't know that for sure.
Yeah.
Like you don't wish for anyone to get fired from any job
No. No. No.
personally,
No.
but
I
like
the
this is
and I
it
ask
is what it
because
is at this point.
it's a question I got this week in my mailbag that'll go up Wednesday morning at the Athletic. Um, the thing for me, John, is I think you have to see what happens against Michigan. Right? To me,
Right.
that's the
But
thing. And it's if it looks this bad again, which quite frankly would be remarkable because it's going to be difficult, I think, for the offense to look this terrible again. I mean, it was just that epically, historically bad. But I do think you have a lot riding on that game, not only for this team, but I think potentially for the coordinator too.
yes, you are correct. But is there a reason to think it'll look different? Right. You know what I mean? Like, is
That
there
is true. Yeah, that is fair. That is
like
fair.
based on what we know now, I think the expectations are that it'll probably look similar against Michigan, and then that's now if it does look different, they look great. Then no, he should be back next year, and you know what I mean. They will be rolling with a lot of momentum at that point because if it does look different, they're going to win that game.
Right.
But I don't think it will at this point, and I think that'll probably look pretty similar to Saturday. And even if they somehow win, I don't think it'll be like an offensive showing that does it. It'll be the defense coming up with even bigger moments than it did against Ohio State.
And I think too, fans, because again, this is a hot talking point. You have to remember, I'm not so sure Drew Aller is here if it isn't for Mike Yursich, right? So you have that layer to this
I'm
as
pretty
well.
sure.
I mean, like, going back to his recruitment, like, that was kind of what Drew had told me was, "Hey, Mike is that's the relationship that matters most," and it makes sense because that's the guy you're spending the most time with,
Yes.
as a quarterback, besides, of course, the strength staff. So, again, I think that's something that we'll continue to monitor. Um, but yeah, I mean, in terms of panic surrounding this team, really just surrounding this offense, I think there's a lot of that. I think it's warranted. One of the questions that I am grappling with this week, John, my colleague Ari Wasserman posed this question on Monday on The Athletic, and I texted Ari right away and I said, "Hey, I think this is a really good and valid point." And that point is that question, because I don't have the answer to it, although I tried to come up with one. Is this right here the ceiling for Penn State? Is the ceiling a team that probably goes 10-2, probably makes another New Year's Six bowl, maybe wins a New Year's Six bowl game? Like, are we living in Penn State's ceiling right now?
So it's a difficult question for a couple of reasons. I actually asked this question after Michigan last year, right? Like it was is this just who Penn State is now?
Mhm.
The team that can beats who they should and can't get over the top of the teams that are, better than them, which or on the same level as them, I should say, because it's tough when they are better than you.
Right.
Um, I don't think this is the ceiling in part because, and this is a large part of the equation, next year changes so much from a playoff standpoint
Mhm.
that like being this is actually a good outcome next year. You know what I mean? Like finishing
Yeah,
10
but
and
but
2
is
next
it
year,
is it if you get in, you're the
it
11
is.
seed and you lose in the playoff, like, is that
I
gonna
don't think
change
I don't think they would be an
perception?
11 seed though. I think it's probably like closer to a 7 or 8 seed
Okay,
and
well,
they
say
win.
you're right now you're ranked 10th, right? So say you get in and you're 10 and you lose, right? Does that change? And I don't know, like, does that change fans' perception? Because, like, I
So
think
I
of it as
think
it's great to be in the mix, right? Like, to me, that's fine. But we know there's some people are gonna view that as national championship or bust, and I just don't think that's the
so
correct way to evaluate this program.
I think being in the mix right now is still a different thing than it is next year because being in the mix
Mhm.
right now is like being one of the top 4 teams and you have a chance at winning the title because you're one of the top 4 teams. Expanding to 12 changes the variance a lot with the playoff system. I mean, we see it in like baseball all the time, right? Like as the playoffs get bigger, it becomes more variable because there are more likelihood for upsets, especially in football when it's a one-off. You know what I mean? It's not a best of 3 or best of 5 or whatever. Like I think once it expands to 12, we will see fewer 1 and 2 seeds being like the definitive at the top. Um, just because they're going to have to win, like, you know what I mean, multiple
'Cause
games to
Penn
just to
State
get there.
needs that chaos. Like, I think that to me,
Yeah,
that is best
right.
case scenario.
And I think that chaos like means that they kind of I don't know that it means that they rise up a level as much as Georgia,
Mhm.
Alabama, Ohio State come back a little closer to the pack because you're just there's so much more required of you to win a title that there's more variability. So I think one, I think there is another step for them to take. I think the offense is such a disaster that if you just rectify, like if they have an average offense
Mhm.
Saturday, they win. For as awesome as Ohio State's defense is, Penn
Maybe,
State's
but
is up
you've
there too.
ruffled a lot of feathers with Ohio State
That's
people,
fine.
John. At
That's
this
fine.
point, would you like to apologize? And is there anything you'd
No,
like to say? You're doubling
no.
down on that?
Like there were two of the
Great.
top 3 to 5 defenses in the country playing against each other. I thought Penn State had the better quarterback. I thought Ohio State was better most everywhere else. And we talked about this. If you put Drew Allar on Ohio State, I think Ohio State might win by like 3 touchdowns. I think that he is. I think McCord struggled on some level on Saturday, in part because of the Penn State defense,
I
in part
wanna
because of
I wanna
what
revisit
what
that.
he is as a quarterback.
I want to revisit that part because one of the things I've seen a lot of since this weekend is that we as the media have been too easy on Drew Aller, that we haven't given him enough blame for Saturday. You just said right there you think he's the better quarterback than Kyle McCord. Um, Drew Aller did not look good on Saturday, right? Like that's stating the obvious.
Correct.
He said as much afterward. He said he sucked and doubled down on that and asked why. And he said, well, because I did, right? Very honest, brutally honest assessment of his play. Now, I think you and I are aligned on this, but I could be wrong. Why are you not, or are we not assigning more blame to Drew Aller on Saturday?
It's a lot harder to succeed when you're set up to fail. And I think that's all it comes down to. Like, I
So
don't
what
know that
does
there's
that
much
mean,
more.
John? Let's parse that a little more.
It means Mike Yurcich set him up to fail, right? Like I wrote about this. That you mentioned the anecdote about Drew saying he sucked. Like he had tears in his eyes and took accountability and everything. And that was my lead to my story, right? That he's sitting here like owning this.
Mhm.
And frankly, like I don't think it was something that he necessarily needed to take ownership of. Like I thought he was like he was
Play
not good,
calling did
right?
not help him, and that
Yeah,
was
he
yeah, we're aligned on
and
this
you
point then,
notice
yeah.
and you notice that, like, at the end of the game, by the way, when they go tempo and to be clear, Ohio State backed off, like, they were allowing more to happen because they could and they knew they could still win the game, but when Drew didn't have, as much to worry about, right, when the play calling wasn't so
Mhm.
overthought that I think it was like it was early in the game and, like, they were just forced to make calls quick and go and go and go, I thought Drew looked really good down that drive as he was able to just kind of go out and make plays. But yeah, I think he was just set up to fail, and I think that's he's definitely he should play better, right? Like he was not good by any means, but I don't know of a ton of quarterbacks in their seventh career start that haven't been part of an or in an open offense to this point in their college career. I don't know many that would succeed in the circumstances they were in, especially when the play calling is kind of setting you back time and time and time and time again.
Yeah, I the other part of this with the play calling, the run to pass ratio, right? You take out kind of the last 2 drives because as you mentioned, John, like, it was Ohio State's backing off Penn
Yeah.
State. At that point, they're down 2 possessions. So, that was something that James Franklin had mentioned after the game Saturday that he thought Penn State needed to run the ball more, and he said, "But, like, let me go back and watch it." Interestingly enough, or at least I think so interestingly enough, on Tuesday, he said that the run pass ratio wasn't as bad as he thought, that he was actually fine, that he did not think they needed to run the ball more. I disagree with that. I think they absolutely needed to run the ball more, especially going back to the sequence where Nick Singleton had the 20-yard run and the 16-yard run. He had 3 rushes on 1 drive and only 9 in the entire game. Now, I get it. Third downs were a mess, and that's the bigger part of this. So there was no rhythm. But to me, it just felt like Penn State was very committed to this rotation and that it was going to be kind of hell or high water. We're going to give Nick 2 series, Katron 2 series, and just keep rotating this thing. Did you take issue, John, with the run pass ratio?
So I actually didn't. I think their
Okay.
timing of running it was really the issue, right?
Okay.
Like I think they should have run less on third and medium. And I
Mhm.
think they should have run more on,
When you have
second.
3rd and 1 maybe, and you
Yeah,
know you're
or
going
like
for it on 4th down? Like, I get it,
honestly,
you're gonna
like
I don't like that, yeah.
I'm okay with throwing on that third down. I think I said this before. I would
Mhm.
prefer to run it twice there, but I would rather take a deep shot on third down than run it on fourth down. They threw it underneath on third down. We don't know what the play
Yep.
call was. We don't know if it was initially designed to go deep, but yeah, I think it was the timing more than the frequency that I had issue with. Those I think it was twice they ran on 3rd and 6 and Singleton got stuffed on both times. Like they were trying to
Yeah.
be unpredictable because too often early on they were going run, run, pass like over and over
Yeah.
and over again. And that is like I don't want to call it old school football. It's like traditional thinking of you run on first down, you run on second
Are
down,
you
you
calling
throw
it
if you
boomer
have
ball,
to.
John? Is that what you're calling this?
No, I'm just saying like you set yourself up to fail because
Yeah.
that's what everyone's expecting, right? Like they're expecting you to run on early downs and throw on late downs. And when you do that, you're not giving your quarterback a chance to succeed. And again, that goes back to, the timing of the run calls were not benefiting Drew Allar, right? Like they were not helping Drew succeed. And I think that was my issue more so than the frequency of it. Because there were times where I was like, oh, they should be running the ball here. There are also times where they ran it and I was like, this really
They
needs to be
couldn't,
a pass.
right. No, and to me, my point is Nick Singleton is one of your most explosive, if not the explosive player on your offense. I know we haven't seen that for most of this year, but still, I think in these spots in these big games, you got to get this guy the ball and try to. And they did try. I mean, there was a pass that Nick dropped where they tried to get something going that way, but I just think it's again, John, it's that explosive element that this offense cannot figure out. It can't tap into it. Um, they have a very, very nice opportunity this weekend to get right against Indiana.
They
Um,
better get right against Indiana. This
yeah,
Indiana team's a
see,
mess.
I am not concerned about a Penn State snowball effect just because
No.
Indiana is that bad. And I know James Franklin was asked about that today and talked about it. because we have seen that in the past where the first loss snowballs into the second. But I am not concerned about that. And before I forget, quick update: James Franklin did say he was asked about Chop Robinson. He said that they expect Chop back at some point, that they don't think this is a season ending injury. Obviously, that was a scary moment. James Franklin did not specifically say what it was, but I think to me, to my untrained eyes, I'm assuming it's a head injury, concussion, something like that, based off of kind of keeping the towel over his head to avoid light, those kinds of things. But it sounds like Robinson is kind of doing as good as possible. So we'll kind of keep an eye on that, on his timeline for return. But John, they don't need him against Indiana. Like, there's that part of it too. You've got some
No, I
time.
don't need it. I don't know that they need much of anyone against Indiana. This is
Ouch.
listen. They fired their offensive coordinator earlier this year.
Mhm.
Rod Carey's the new offensive coordinator there. Who
Which
Pat hired at Temple?
yeah, not James Franklin mentioned that, and I was like, yeah, I don't think you want to really brag about that. The way that kind of went at Temple, right? Was not
Yeah,
didn't go too well. But
yeah. It did
anyway,
not exactly. It didn't go
it was bad.
well.
It's very bad. Yeah.
Uh,
But he made that link on his own, and he went and he said it, and I was like, yeah, that's not the best, but sure.
anyway, yeah, that was a tough hire, and not one that worked out well.
Mm-mm.
But no, I think like Indiana is like really bad. Taven Jackson's their backup quarterback right now, and I thought at the beginning of the year that he would be the starting quarterback for this Indiana team. Brendan Sorsby's the starter right now. He's not particularly good either. Jalen Lucas is a lot of fun, right? He's a kick
Yep.
returner. He plays running back. They'll get him the ball out of the backfield. They're trying to get him touches, but mostly just an absolute mess of an offense. Um, Andre Carter is someone James Franklin mentioned as a pass rusher who had some success actually against Ohio State in their first game of the year. But yeah, this was just like this is the worst team in the Big Ten. I don't want to say that definitively. I'm trying to
Yeah.
think. Is there anyone I'm forgetting here? But I think it's the worst team in the
No,
Big Ten.
I mean
Uh,
Northwestern is,
yeah,
but
and like
yeah.
Michigan State's in a
Ooh,
bad place right
that's
now.
they're in
Yeah,
a very
not
bad place
good.
for many reasons.
Yes. But
Um,
no, I think right now, I think Indiana's the worst team in the Big Ten. The line opened, if I remember correctly, at 27.5, and now I think it's at 31.5. And I still think they're just not giving enough points. Like if Penn State shut out Iowa 31-0, like
yeah.
this game's going to be over pretty quickly
And it is a noon kick. I will say the
on
first thing.
CBS.
Yeah, that's yes, noon on CBS, which is just weird.
So very
This
weird.
is this is our new bizarro world that we're living in.
Yeah.
But the weather so far looks absolutely beautiful. So I think that's after fans have had some rough go-arounds with rain in Beaver Stadium. Enjoy the weather for this one because it looks really, really delightful. We do know, not that I would ever dare glance ahead, John, to the next opponent. I would never do that. However,
No.
Penn State has a more competitive game the following week at Maryland. We do know that that is a 3:30 kick. So, which I refer to that as the let's occupy your entire day kick at 3:30.
Yeah, especially in Maryland, it could be a
Mhm.
drive, right? Like you could, if it's a noon game, you drive
3
home
hours
that
and 40
night.
minutes from State College. Yeah,
Yeah. If
it's
it's
a
a
little bit
night
on the edge.
game, you drive out in the
Mhm.
morning, but it's a 3:30 game, and either I'm gonna be driving home at like midnight or I'm gonna be staying a second night in Maryland. So shout out to the schedule makers and time choosers for that. Really, really appreciate it. But
Yeah.
no, as far as this weekend goes, like the Indiana defense is probably where they hang their hat. It's just also not good.
Yeah, and they're even, like, I think 60th, around 60th nationally. I
Yeah,
was looking this up in total defense before we started. The offense is, like, the 120 something in total offense. Like,
it's
it's bad.
horrendous.
It's really
It's
bad.
it's kind of amusing how bad not quite Iowa. I know I think I said earlier this year on here
Eef.
that I enjoy watching Iowa because it's just it's that bad. It's not quite that bad, but it's kind of close. But no, I think it's an Indiana program that's kind of in disarray right now. Tom Allen's
Mhm.
buyout's $20 million. If it wasn't, I don't know if he would be coaching right now still. Like it's a total
That's a
disaster and has
wild
been.
buyout.
Yeah, but he got the extension after the
Yeah.
2020 season, and so like they have success for that 1 year, and suddenly everything turned sour for them. But yeah, I think this is for as much as you can complain about Penn State and where they're at right now. It can always be worse, and right now it definitely is worse in Bloomington. This is they're going to overpower them on both sides of the ball. This is not going to be a close game. I don't know how much you've thought about a prediction or even analysis of what this matchup is going to be, or what we can, because it's tough because usually we can talk about right now what we can learn about this Penn State team.
Mhm.
And frankly, I don't know that we're going to learn anything. Maybe there's some stuff you can pick up about Maryland, but I don't know if there's anything you can learn about this team until they play Michigan, right? Like it's
I'm with
all
you.
and it
It's
feels like
tough.
it's going to be that way for a while. Like you're just kind of biding your time, like till they play an actual top 10 team.
Yeah, no, and then that's the challenging thing, right? Like I refer to these types of games as developmental scrimmages because that's likely
Yeah,
what's going to happen in the second half here. Like we'll be seeing a lot of
might be
Bo
the second
Beulah.
quarter again.
Man, John, you just keep trying to,
I can't
this
help it.
offense has plenty of issues to work out. So I think you
That's
have to,
true. I was gonna maybe they
unleash
should
the third quarter.
maybe
I,
they
I
should take all 4 quarters this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was one of the things James Franklin said with some of the statistics. He's like, "Well, it's because we haven't had guys play 4 quarters." Well, you know what? Maybe the offense, maybe this is the week, because we've seen how it works out. Otherwise, yeah, I do think beyond your frontline guys, your starters, sure, we can look at the rest of the roster. We can say that, yeah, maybe one of those 8 wide receivers in that jumbled up mess kind of steps up, or that's somebody that we want to keep an eye on for sure. I think the defensive line rotations as they get deeper, that gets interesting. But
Chop
really,
status too on that front.
yeah, chop status and like you don't need them. I have no idea what's going on with JB Nelson. That was not asked about today. I'm sure
Yeah,
they'll
that was so
tomorrow.
strange. He was not on the availability report, and to my recollection, did not
He
play a
warmed up.
snap.
Yeah.
I saw
Warmed up,
him
did
on the
not play a
sideline
snap. I don't
at the
know if maybe
he
something
seemed
happened at
fine at
warm
the end
up
of the
or what.
game when we were down there. Like we were on the field and like he seemed fine. Like I don't know. I mean, obviously I'm not like
Yeah.
doing an evaluation down there based on that, but like
This is yeah,
still like he seemed like he was
John
in a good
Sauber,
mood. Like
MD.
yeah, right. I'm sure that would go really well. Uh, but no, it was
Yeah, that
really
was a
strange that he was
weird
on the availability report.
yeah, that's definitely gonna get asked about on Wednesday, because I think that's again something you kinda keep an eye on, the tackle spot moving forward, right? Because Olu Fashanu, we all know everyone in their right mind, this is gonna be the last go around, so we've seen plenty of Drew Shelton, but I think you kinda wanna get more eyeballs on him, right? And that was last year at Indiana where Shelton made that surprise start, and that was kind of like, "Oh my god, how is this true freshman starting?" So it's a little bit of a full circle moment, I think, for him. And then I think you have to wonder too, how does this entire team respond, right? Because we haven't seen Drew Allar come back after a loss before at Penn State. We don't know as the starter how that kind of goes. I think there's a lot of conversations I would imagine happening behind the scenes in the Lash building this week where it's saying, hey, the defense, like, you can't be pointing fingers at the offense, even though you certainly played good enough to win that game at Ohio State. So I think you have to kind of worry about the cohesion a little bit there and the leadership on this team and who takes the reins, because that was such a big storyline this offseason. And I think guys like Theo Johnson really kind of have to right the ship here, and kind of figure this thing out. But maybe a little bit in the weeds here, John. But who's the punt returner this week?
I mean, I would have to guess it's Hardy. He owned the
Uh,
mistake afterward. Like
you own the
I
mistake, but do
it's
you give Saunders another shot? I mean, keep in
no, I
mind
think
2 returns. It was against UMass.
because I think given what happened, he made the right decision, right? Like he thought he was tracking the ball, he thought he was under it. It turned, and
Yeah,
instead of trying to catch the ball and potentially muffing it, he just let
I
it
let it
go.
go.
Which, if
Yeah,
those are your two options, where it's a potential muff or let it go, to me, let it go 100 times out of 100. It's much easier to make up 25 yards on offense than it is to get the ball back when that team has the ball midfield,
is
right?
it with
Like
this offense, John? Is it?
well, that's actually a good point. I think broadly speaking, in the
Yeah,
sport of football, that
yeah.
is true. But no, I think I think it's Daquan Hardy. I think he's earned it at this point. Maybe they split guys. I don't know, but I think it should be Hardy.
Yeah, I the thing I'll be looking at are kind of the substitution patterns, and I want to see some more of these younger linebackers, right? An extended look at Tony Rojas. We've heard a lot, seen a good bit from guys in the secondary like Elliot Washington, right? And so, again, to me, this is one of those games where you're going to see presumably some of the freshmen maybe that we even haven't seen before. Jameel Lyons is kind of back in the fold now at defensive end, so he's another guy to kind of keep an eye on. But yeah, this is going to take, I think, John, the developmental scrimmage tone in
Yeah,
the probably for sure the fourth quarter. I would think the third as well. I'm gonna go Penn State 45, Indiana 3. Now
giving
I
them
say
three, huh?
that I say that and I just thought shit, I'm giving them 45 after what I saw this past week, and That
This
might be
Indiana
a little
team is
bit
really
too
bad, though.
much.
Take
Um,
solace in how bad it is.
I think that's what I need to remind myself of. Now, do we see any explosive plays?
Yeah, I think it's I don't think it's anything that makes you feel better about the offense
Yeah.
because I think it's just a product of they're just you know a superior team with the
Mhm.
for as frustrating as the offense is, their offense is still a lot better than Indiana's defense, uh, and so I think I want I've gone back and forth on this. I think they're going to cover that 31.5 pretty easily. Since you said 45-3, I
Are
will
they,
alter mine a
John?
little bit. I will go 49-3 and or 49-0, excuse me, and say they get another shutout and that helps get some of the momentum back. I just don't think this Indiana team's good enough to score. The caveat is if Jalen Lucas gets in the open
Mhm.
field, he will score. He's very good. He's very fun. But yeah, I think the things I'm watching here, it's just the wide receivers at this point, right? And like it's tough to even draw a lot from the play calling because it's kind of a no wrong answer situation against a team like Indiana right now.
Or so
And
we
now if
think.
he now I
Or
was
so we
going to say
think.
if they find some wrong answers and then we'll be talking about the play calling again. But I think I'm watching these receivers, even the top two, and you want to see them play well against a team like this to help with confidence for the whole offense. But everyone beyond Keandre Lambert Smith and Harrison Wallace III, like I want to see how those guys do. I want to see someone show something if you're rooting for Penn State, you should be rooting for one of those guys to do something big. I think it's going to be crucial for them that they get one of those guys to show up at some point and prove just to be the guy. Like I said earlier, don't have a ton of faith that they're going to do that and that Penn State's going to have that third option at their disposal. But I still think it's the thing that needs to be focused on most right now.
And you know what, John? You know what I think we see return? The T formation.
I, I, listen. This feels like a
Putting the
situation where they're going
T
to
in get right game.
Yeah, they're gonna have to run that thing back a few times just to prove, like, hey, we promise we're
Yeah.
gonna do it again.
It's here. It's
Uh,
here to stay,
yeah,
guys. Yeah,
but no,
I
this
mean,
is gonna be
they have
the
to.
best part is we don't have to drive to Bloomington.
Not this time.
It's not a fun drive, especially after a long weekend in Columbus. So, but no, this is like there will be stuff to monitor. It is going to be interesting to see how they respond emotionally. Like I said, a little tougher to learn about this team schematically, but you can learn about the confidence and the bounce back ability, which I think is important. But again, against a really bad team, shouldn't be that difficult. Uh, but no, I think that's a good place to leave it right now. We've covered a lot of ground today. As always, you can rate, review, subscribe, YouTube, Apple Podcast, Spotify. It all helps out. You can follow Audrey covering Penn State at The Athletic, me at the Sun Daily Times. Until next time, thank you for watching the Nittany Dispatch. Talk to you soon.